Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another time of Bible study. Today we're in Genesis chapter 43. We're almost there. We're almost at the end. But when we last met, Joseph had been made number 2 in the land of Egypt and had begun to implement his plan to save the people. The 7 good years had passed, and it was now time to persevere through the 7 years of famine, the bad years. The famine was far from localized. It stretched throughout the known world at the time, and it even fell upon Joseph's family way back in the land of Canaan. They had heard of the grain that was available there in Egypt, so Jacob sent all of his sons, except for Benjamin, with silver to trade for this grain so they could survive. When they arrived, they found themselves before an Egyptian governor, not knowing it was in fact their long-lost brother. He accused them of being spies and put them in jail for a few days, just for good measure. Maybe this was a little payback for the way they had treated him. But he agreed to keep one brother in prison until the others returned to Canaan, and then they would come back with their youngest brother Benjamin. They agreed and went back to their father to explain all that had happened in Egypt. Jacob, however, refuses to allow his only surviving son from the now deceased Rachel, Benjamin, or so he thought. Little did he know the surprise that would be getting ready to present itself in a short while. So let's continue our study today in Genesis chapter 43. Let's start with the first 5 verses. It says, "Now the famine was still severe in the land, so when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, 'Go back and buy us a little more food.' But Judah said to him, 'The man warned us solemnly, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.'" Of course, this famine is continuing, and the Egyptian grain that they had purchased before was all gone. They had gotten it free of charge, didn't they? But what would they do now? Israel tells his sons to go back to Egypt and to get some more food. But there's a hitch. The Egyptian governor had told them not to come back without their youngest brother, Benjamin. In fact, Simeon was still in prison waiting for their return. We have to wonder how long he had been in prison at this point. They knew that there was no point in going back to Egypt unless their youngest brother accompanied them, for they would most likely end up in prison for the rest of their lives if they didn't return with Benjamin. And in the meantime, their family would starve to death. So they had to make a stand. These brothers had to make a stand. If Benjamin didn't go with them, then they wouldn't go either. What would Jacob, decide to do here? Well, let's read on. Israel asked, "Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?" They replied, "The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. 'Is your father still living?' he asked us. 'Do you have another brother?' We simply answered his questions. 'How were we to know?' he would say, 'Bring your brother down here.' Then Judah said to Israel his father, 'Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice. Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm and a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also, go back to the man at once, and may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." So Israel, well, he was between a rock and a hard place. He didn't really have a choice in this situation, at least in survive this famine. He would have to send Benjamin and his 9 other brothers, or they would all die of starvation. He had put it off as long as he could. It was time for them to go back to Egypt to retrieve not only more grain, but also their other brother that was still in prison. Judah further reassured Israel, his father, by taking all the responsibility for bringing Benjamin back to him alive, as well as Simeon. He guaranteed his brother's safety. So they loaded up all the gifts and a double amount of silver for the Egyptian governor, and they said their goodbyes. It was especially hard on their father, of course, especially in saying goodbye to Benjamin. We can just imagine the stress and the anguish and, as he put it, the bereavement that would have been upon Israel or Jacob at this time. But it had to be done if they were to survive. Now, let's read on, starting in verse 15. So the men took the gifts and double amount of silver, and Benjamin also. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare dinner. They are to eat with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him and took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened when they were taken to his house. They thought, "We were brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys." So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. "Please, sir," they said, "we came down here the first time to buy food, but at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found his silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of his sack. So we have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put the silver in our sacks." "It's all right," he said. "Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you your treasures in treasure in your sacks. I received your silver." Then he brought Simeon out to them. So the brothers finally make it back to Egypt with their gifts and the double amount of silver, and now Joseph finally gets a glimpse of his younger brother. He is no doubt filled with joy at this, but he can't allow this to be revealed, at least not yet. He doesn't want to let the proverbial cat out of the bag. Not yet. He still has, I guess, some payback in store for his older brothers. He tells his servant to receive these brothers and make preparations for a big party, apparently in their honor, a dinner at noon. They had come through on their promise to the Egyptian official, but the brothers are skeptical. They aren't convinced of the intentions of this official. They believe it's a trap, considering their silver had been secretly put back in their sacks last time. They pleaded with this servant to just let them get their grain and go. But the servant insists that there's no need to fear here. Their God had been with them the last time. He was the one who had given them back their silver. Now we can only imagine what's going on in these guys' heads at this time. I would bet that they were absolutely scared to death, and rightly so. They didn't exactly trust the man, the governor, their long-lost brother, who had imprisoned them and who had kept one of their brothers in prison up to this very moment. I'm quite sure they were wondering what was going to happen next. So let's read on, starting in verse 24. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon, because they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts that they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." And they bowed low to pay him honor. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." The servant continued to show kindness to these brothers. He provided a means by which they could clean up from their long trek there, and he made sure that even their donkeys had something to eat. Once they had all washed up, they prepared their gifts for this Egyptian official. As soon as Joseph arrived, they presented the gifts to him, and they once again bowed down to him. That kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Sounds a lot like the dreams that this young man had years before, the dreams that caused his brothers to hate him all the more, the dreams that caused him to, in fact, end up being here as this official. All part of God's plan. Joseph didn't really care about the gifts of silver. He was much more concerned about the rest of his family. He asked about his father. Was he still living? He was, in fact, alive and well. And the brothers bowed down again, even lower this time. Then he looked and he saw Benjamin there. And now remember, he would have still been doing all of this through an interpreter as he talked back and forth with his brothers. They were still fooled. He goes on to ask if this was in fact the youngest son of their father, the one that he had ordered them to bring back to prove that they weren't spies in the land. He knew it was his own brother, of course, but he was still trying to keep up this ruse that he had begun months, possibly even a year or so earlier. So let's go on, starting in verse 30. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out and, controlling himself, said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. Out of sorrow and surprise, Joseph had to excuse himself, and because he was about to break character, so he went into his private room to weep, to cry. He was understandably overcome with emotion, seeing his brother, his full brother, for the first time in years. He gathered his composure, and then he would return to the party. It must have been a grand party for sure, with plenty of food and drink for everyone. He had them sit each brother according to their age. And then the biggest surprise of all, the youngest was given 5 times as much as anyone else. He could really gorge himself, couldn't he? We have to wonder what's going on really in Joseph's head at this moment. Did he already have an extravagant plan worked out? Or was he still trying to figure out what his next step would be? When would he finally reveal himself to his brothers? Or would he? Of course he would. It's amazing that they still haven't recognized his brother Joseph. I mean, they had hated even the sight of him before. Now they can't even recognize him just a few years later. Plus, we now have Benjamin in play here. You would think if anyone was to recognize Joseph, it would be his own full brother. But he was probably awfully young when Joseph was sold into slavery by the other brothers. So we just don't know what's truly going on here. But most of us know the rest of the story. But we will have to wait for the coming weeks to continue this drama. Even in Scripture, we find families that really, well, honestly, put the fun back into dysfunctional, don't they? But God still used them for His glory, just as He can with us and our families. May God bless you and keep you. May He give you peace until we can meet again to study His Word.